Ron Farina is the author of Who Will Have My Back?, Out of the Shadows, Voices of American Women Soldiers, and Life Looks Different Now. Other works include Unsung Heroes, Keeping Promises, and War Torn. Ron lives in Connecticut with his wife and 2 golden retrievers, Henry and Preacher. He served in Vietnam in 1966 and 1967. Ron holds an MFA from Western Connecticut State University.
Thank you. And it's so good to see this standing room only crowd. I love it. But I wanted to first tell you how the book came to be, because this is a book that was never supposed to be written. So let me explain that. As a writing major here, one of the few, I studied with Mary Collins, and there's a little tangled web. So Mary was approached to write a book about caregivers to veterans. And that was a book that royalty wanted written. So Mary's brother, Jim, is an historian from Georgetown University who happens to be great friends with the Duke of Belgium. The Duke of Belgium wanted this book written about caregivers to disabled veterans. And the quick story about him is his family was interred in several concentration camps in World War II, rescued by American soldiers at the end of the war, and they are the oldest and richest noble family in Europe. They have a foundation. Part of the foundation's mission is to always recognize and give back to America, particularly the American military. He began visiting Bethesda Naval Hospital at the beginning of our involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan, and visiting wounded. And one of the things that he noticed was caregivers didn't seem to get the attention that probably they should be. So he wanted a book written about caregivers. Jim asked Mary if she would do it. Mary said, I think it might be a book for veterans, and I might have somebody in mind. She turned to me. I was in the middle of an MFA writing this particular book, which was my MFA thesis that wound up getting published, and I was hemming and hawing. And the Duke's aide called me and said, I will come all the way to Connecticut from Belgium if I have to convince you. And I said, well, that won't be necessary. I'll do it. So we wrote the book. And it was short, to the point. But along the way, there was just one comment, just one. And that comment was from another lady author who said, you didn't include any stories about women in that book. I said, well, we need to remedy that then. And I went back to the Duke with his deep pockets and looked for funding for a second book about wounded women soldiers who had served in Iraq and Afghanistan. And he agreed. But he agreed only on the condition that I write a third book, which is Sacrifice, which is coming out early next year. So that's how the book project came to us. This book is about 9 seriously wounded women who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. But before 2013, the American military had a ban on women serving in combat. Only one of the women in this book was wounded after 2013. So the first woman, Connie, was blown up in a Humvee while on patrol. Kendra lost a leg, ambushed while on a foot patrol. The only woman in the squad that day. Marlene, wounded 3 separate times, twice in Iraq, once in Afghanistan. Jennifer from Shelton, Connecticut, wounded in a Humvee that ran over an IED. 5'2" 2-inch tall Mary Jessie from Arizona lost an arm while manning a machine gun in a turret of a Humvee on patrol. Women were not allowed to serve in combat. Manning a machine gun in a turret while on patrol, women are not allowed to serve in combat. Vivian, whose story I'll read, was on a foot patrol in Afghanistan, serving simultaneously with her husband, both West Point grads, both first-generation Asian Americans. Vivian's Chinese American, her husband is Vietnamese American. And Maggie walked directly into the path of a suicide bomber. She's the only woman in this book wounded after 2013. Tara wounded in an attack while commanding a squad of men. Women were not allowed to serve in combat. And Lana lost part of her brain while on patrol in a Humvee. So women, really throughout our history, have always gone to war. They just never got the credit. And the stories in this book were written in the hope of changing that. And finally, on January 24th, 2013, then Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta removed the military's ban on women serving in combat. But implementation of those rules, even to this day, is ongoing. So I want to read an excerpt from Vivian's story. Vivian is a West Point grad. She served in Afghanistan, wounded, and she's first generation Asian American. She met her husband John at West Point. He's first generation Vietnamese American. They both served simultaneously. I'm going to cover the attack that she was wounded in, and then, time permitting, I want to briefly give you a story that is told before a woman joined the military. Because I want you to understand who these women are. They're just regular people. And telling you a story about who they were before they became a soldier, I think will help you understand who the people are that actually serve in the military. So this happens on the morning of January 19th, 2011, on the Afghan-Pakistan border. So Captain Vivian Chu, West Point, 2005, sensed movement. A shadow quickly became a small boy dressed in yellow. A boy some of the team would later say they had seen before. His yellow tunic hung over a vest strapped across his thin frame, and a kufi, a Muslim prayer hat, circled his head just above his ears, exposing a close-cropped black hair. His worth in the world, the number of Americans he could kill. The boy remembered what he'd been told. The Americans are coming. Wait for them. When you see them, you must do what needs to be done. Run to them. Run among them. And when you are close, send them to hell. Captain Chu looked at the boy. She dismissed him. Young, small, harmless. He's just a kid. But he was quick to do what was demanded of him. He ran at the Americans, and as he neared them, the boy pressed his thumb against the detonator wired to the vest. But something went horribly wrong. In their haste, those who would send the boy to kill the Americans had draped a flawed weapon over the boy's shoulders, fastening it against his chest so that the vest imploded. His tattered flesh and shattered bone lay scattered in front of the American soldiers. Later that day, a battlefield brigade officer headquartered, I'll give you the name, it doesn't matter. Americans were situated on FOBs, forward observation bases, or COPs, combat outposts. So she's on this forward observation base called Spin Boldock. So this brigade officer goes in search of her. He'd been informed about the attack, knew that Captain Chu, Vivian, was the wife of one of his officers, the West Point graduate Johnny Cochran, Vietnamese. He used his personal cell, called a fellow officer at Kandahar who located John. When he connected with John, the commander found Vivian. "I've got your husband John on a cell," he said. "Talk to him." And Vivian looked at the phone, and then at the commander, and shrugged her shoulders and raised her hands and, "Huh? It's your husband, Captain. I've got your husband. Take the phone," the commander said. "Are you with me?" "Yes, sir." "Then take the phone." "John? Hon, it's me. Are you okay? What happened? What happened?" He slowly repeated, his voice shaky and faint. Vivian could hear the fear as he spoke. He couldn't hide how frightened he'd been for her. "Well, we got ambushed. It was a boy suicide bomber. A boy. The vest he had on, they made it wrong or worn incorrectly. Something wasn't right, John. Otherwise, he would have killed us all. There was blood everywhere." "Did any of it hit you?" "Huh? Any parts of him?" "John, I'm not sure what you're asking. Did the boy's flesh get on you?" No, I'm sure of it." You're sure you're okay?" John repeated. "I'm okay. I love you, John. I love you too." After the call, adrenaline that had sustained Vivian, that had kept her going, lessened, and pain began to take hold. Every joint and muscle seemed to beg for relief, and a headache built behind burning eyes. Disoriented, she leaned against her Chu. A Chu is a containerized housing unit, fancy way of saying shipping containers that they lived in. In that instant, coming down from the battlefield high, hearing her husband's voice, Vivian understood how lucky she'd been, how lucky they'd all been. Sometimes, on a battlefield, luck is all that keeps a soldier alive. A dud RPG, rocket-propelled grenade. Sun glinting a warning from a worn rifle barrel. Small arms fire that misses. A shadow. A subtle warning. An inside-out suicide vest. The next morning, January 20th, is part of what happened to Vivian overnight. She was wounded. She didn't know she'd been wounded. And I think some of you probably know what TBI is, right? Traumatic brain injury. Well, she suffered traumatic brain injury in that attack, didn't know it. There were no visible signs. Sometime in the middle of the night, Vivian rushed from her bed, vomiting into a wastebasket until she felt as if she'd been turned inside out. And the physical and emotional trauma, the horror of the attack at the border, had found her. Disoriented, her body shaking uncontrollably, dizzy, she stumbled out of her quarters, and in the dark, like a punch-drunk boxer, she weaved her way to the medical tent. "I need help. I need help. Something's wrong," she said. Medics helped her to an exam table, laid her down, began to examine her. She'd been in the path of the blast wave, and she'd been wounded. But not all wounds bleed, concussed. The symptoms were all there, but there was more. The horror of the boy's death, imprinted in the flash drive of her memory, had already been downloaded. Some said the boy might have been a teenager. To Vivian, who had a son of her own, he looked to be no more than 10 years old. She shook her head, tried to delete the image, but she didn't have a password to the file. Small. So small, she kept saying over and over. Who would strap a suicide vest to a small boy. Was he a stunted castaway, a motherless child? How? How does a child become a throwaway, an expendable killing tool to be used and tossed aside? So that's a little bit of Vivian's story. She did recover. She still serves actively. And she is actually up for a star general. First generation Chinese American who served our country and is now being considered, promotions being held, we won't go there, to become a general. Amazing. Let me read you just a little bit about what people were like, what women were like before they joined. This is from one of the stories that's called Saddle Up. So it's boots and chaps, it's cowboy hats, it's spurs and let it go, it's the ropes and the reins and the joy and the pain. And they call the thing rodeo, and that's from Garth Brooks' song, Rodeo. 17-year-old Connie Neal waits in the alley, the hole, or the chute, some call it. She's saddled up on Lady, her 12-year-old chestnut mare, a thoroughbred quarter-horse mix. Lady is a big horse for barrel racing. What you might give away in agility, she makes up for with speed. She's quick. Connie wears Wrangler jeans cinched with a turquoise beaded belt and a silver rodeo buckle, a western shirt, and mother of pearl snaps embroidery decorating her shoulders, and the chest is tucked into her slim waist, and a black Stetson pulled low hides her eyes. A long black braid sways like a pendulum across her back and shoulders. Cowboy boots with pointy toes, something cowboys call roach killers, complete her rodeo outfit. Rider and horse are a team. They work together for years. They know each other, have confidence in each other, trust each other. Lady knows what's expected. She'll do what Connie asks. She'll run for Connie, not out of obligation, but because she wants to. She starts to sweat, tosses her head back, looks over her shoulder, all anticipation. Her muscles tense and a shudder runs through her body. Connie strokes Lady's neck, leans low enough to whisper in her ear. Lady settles, ready now to thunder out of the alley. Ground conditions are good, sandy, without slick spots to worry about. Flags gently flutter on a light breeze, and the announcer's loud, but there's no blaring music, something Lady doesn't like. You're going to like this, Lady. It's a good ring. Are you ready? Lady paws at the dirt. Connie closes her eyes and she takes in the smell of the arena. Lady's sweat, the sounds of the announcer, the crowd, leather complaining as she twists her hips, getting positioned in the saddle. The constant reminder from her dad runs through her mind. Keep your heels down, girl. Keep your heels down. The announcer's voice raises above the roar of the crowd. Next up, Connie Neal. Connie opens her eyes. It's time. On cue, Lady bolts forward. Her hoofs send dirt flying. Connie's low, leaning forward. Horse and rider gather speed. Connie tosses her Stetson to a nearby cowboy just before Lady explodes into the ring at a full run, chasing the cans. Connie shifts her right knee forward up near Lady's shoulder. Her left foot instinctually slides back to Lady's girth, toward her haunch. Lady understands and responds. Horse and rider angle well for the first barrel, turn quickly and line up for the second. They shoot for the third, make the run back toward the entrance. Connie deftly snatches her Stetson from the cowboy, holding it up high. She reins Lady to a halt. It's a good run. One of their best, their last. Several months later, Connie landed in Kuwait, the jump-off point into Iraq. By early spring of 2003, the mild Kuwaiti winter turned hot. Sun blistered the ground, temperatures soared. Staging for the rollout into Iraq became a mind-numbing, repetitive routine, worse in the 100-degree-plus heat. Days blurred, up at 5:30. Chow, formation, work on Humvees, weapons, maintenance, drill. Get ready to roll out. and caught in the hurry up and wait, typical of all things military, trained for action, constantly on edge, soldiers grew restless. Rumor was they'd be rolling into Iraq any day, but the hurry up and wait was mostly wait, punctuated with harassing Scud missile attacks that sent Connie and her fellow soldiers scrambling. When the missiles, rumored to contain gas, rained down, shouts of gas, gas, gas replaced shouts of incoming, a more common refrain from the previous wars, particularly the Vietnam War. Well over 100 soldiers crammed into metal shipping containers. Sardines in a can. Connie made the mistake of being one of the first. The doors slammed shut, everything went black, and in the dark, listening to explosions all around her. Mask on, protective gear, pushed to the rear of the container, squeezed, jostled, bumped by dozens of other soldiers, all of them men. Connie prayed she wouldn't have to inject herself with atropine, either in leg or her heart. And in the dark, heart racing, sweating, her breathing labored and loud inside the mask. The attack went on for more than 30 minutes. And now, 18-year-old Connie, former rodeo rider, sobbed into her mask. She felt the fear so deep that it changed her life forever. This is it. This is how I'm going to die. There's a lot more to Connie's story, too. So those are just excerpts from 2. So, yeah.
Well, I'm fascinated because, of course, this could have been just like one wounded warrior story after another, and I'd love to have you talk as a nonfiction author where you knew that each chapter had to deliver something new. It couldn't just be, oh, they got wounded, because it would be repetitive. So talk about your thought process of selecting who you profiled, and then within each profile, there was something new that you were delivering to the reader other than they got wounded. Because you did a great job of that.
Thank you. She referred me for this book project. I was fortunate enough also to have a budget for research, and Donald Collins did the research, and probably over the course of his involvement, located, I think without embellishment, maybe 40 people that were 40 women who were likely subjects for the book. I interviewed 20. We wanted to get it down to 10, and I'm sorry to tell you that we had 10, and one of the women's stories was fabricated. It happens. People are people. So we wound up with 9, and I'm glad that we wound up with 9. It's a better number. But to answer the question of how did I choose, what made me pick one subject over another was actually how forthcoming that particular woman would be. It's not easy for the women to go back and visit trauma that just about killed every one of them. And you see the cover. I mean, this is Kendra. Kendra was 18 when she lost her leg. Just 18 years old. So I'm asking these women to revisit all of what happened, and it was the ones who actually could summon up the courage to retell the story. What makes each story unique is the personal angle to each individual. Each individual is a very unique person. Vivian, first-generation Chinese-American, ballerina, pianist, West Point graduate. So part of her story is how her father immigrated to the United States and wound up the dad of an only child, single parent. Wife left very shortly after Vivian was born. So there's that angle. Connie's angle is the rodeo and the relationship that she had with her dad. Mary Jessie, who was shot through the back. I mean, this is a woman that's 5'2" inches tall. No winter supposed to be in combat. She's in a turret in a Humvee. Gets shot through the back while she's manning the machine gun to protect the male troops. And not 15 minutes before, the man who was in the turret said, "I'm 6'2", and you're 5'2", and I make such a target. You want to switch?" So the man switched out with the woman who wasn't supposed to be in combat. But her story is Mexican immigrants who came here and who struggled for almost, her parents and grandparents struggled for almost 30 years to become citizens, and became citizens, and the daughter decides that she needs to give back to America after 9/11. So each story has that unique angle that removes the repetition of the battle. I mean, every story that you tell about the battle is they're rolling out on a mission. It's going to be dangerous. There's probably an IED on the road. The Taliban or Iraqi insurgents are waiting. And it's inevitable that they're going to get attacked. And some people say, gee, there's parts of stories that sound the same. Well, they sound the same because what happens in war pretty much is the same, repeatedly, over and over and over.
How much time how long were the interviews for, kind of in general, right? So how much time do you have to talk to somebody, to spend time with them to be able to write something?
Without embellishment, about 20 hours of interviews with each person. And then, all on Zoom, but I refused to use a transcription service. I wanted to go back and watch the Zoom videos and transcribe by hand, but watch the Zoom videos to refresh my memory of the women's reactions as they were telling me things. And sometimes when we would get to the end of the interviewing process, having won their trust, they would suddenly tell me something that they had originally had no intention of telling me. Marlene Rodriguez, finish up all her interviews. And Marlene, we're done. We did it, Marlene. We've captured all the information we need to tell your story. I said, well, no, you didn't. So what else? I tried to kill myself. What? See, my injuries were so bad, wounded 3 times. The last time shot and concussed into severe traumatic brain injury that left her with dozens of epileptic seizures a day. No cure. So she said, I don't want to live like this anymore. She tried to kill herself. She went on Google to learn how to tie a hangman's noose. Well, she didn't do it right. The noose slipped. She fell on her garage floor and broke her leg. She said, well, what was I supposed to do at that point? She said, Ron, I sat on the floor and I laughed so hard. She said, so figure it out. I get wounded like 3 different times in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm a shell of my former self. I can't live alone. I have to have a caregiver 24/7. I try to kill myself and I can't even do that. You know what? I got to figure out a way to live. She went on. She went on a vision quest to cure herself, and through diet and exercise, she became seizure-free, off meds. Became seizure-free, got a degree in recreational therapy, and she works with veterans, rehabbing veterans. I mean, it's women, and to me the beauty of the book is not that they were wounded. Not that they lost limbs, not that they were almost killed, but that every one of them have gone on to do so many amazing things with their life. Kendra, after she was wounded and on pain meds for almost 2 years, became a drug addict. When the Army shut her off from drugs, she became a street addict. Went to prison for 7 months. Got straight in prison, got out, got her daughter back because she had lost her daughter. She has a construction company in Georgia that employs 30 people. They're all stories of triumph, every one of them.
And maybe you've just answered my question now, but in a sense, you're a veteran, right? So how, if you will, painful were having these conversations with these 10 women, or 9 women? And
20.
kind of how, you know.
20 down to 9.
Oh yeah, that's right, that's right.
Yeah.
So that had to be, you know, something, that must have done something to you.
No one has asked publicly that before. Leave it to Dr. G. I'll tell you here, and it's the first time that I admit this publicly. It hurt. And it brought back memories, flashbacks, nightmares, waking my wife up in the middle of the night screaming. And this third book is more intense than this one. So it's not an easy thing for anybody to write.
Well, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Can I just add that so few families now have someone in the military, which wasn't the case in World War II, obviously, that because of someone like you sharing your story, bringing out a book like this, you bring close home to us. What are they doing when they serve? It's easy to block it out. It's easy to put it over there because we don't know anyone in the military. And when I met the Wounded Women Warriors and read your book, you bring them into my living room. And I'm grateful for that because it's a painful thing. And we're really distant now from the costs. And yet we do need the military as we look at what's going on in Ukraine. And these people are doing incredible service. But again, so few, I think it's less than 3% of American families have any contact, 1%. And in World War II, it was like 40%. So we're so detached from what our military is doing. I really appreciate that you've done these books.
Thank you.
And that you yourself served. I think that we're detached from that, and it's a huge service.
Thank you. Thank you. Mary and I had the privilege of meeting 5 of the women personally last January, and that was, I had the book launch here in Connecticut. I could not afford to subsidize their trips. They said, so what? We're coming. And they came on their own dime, and the night before the reading, I was able to sit with all 5 of them at Burton's restaurant in South Windsor, and we had a great dinner and talked and got them all to sign the book. It was really something special meeting them face to face. It was amazing.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks.